Daniel's marrying into a very respected family. We can't risk anything. Complicated. Complicated. That was the word my family used whenever they meant. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the wall. And then, almost as if the universe wanted to twist the knife deeper, my mother texted me a photo 10 minutes later, the official engagement portrait of Daniel and his fiancée, Vanessa, beaming beside her parents at some vineyard estate. I looked at the man standing next to Vanessa, her father, and I nearly dropped my phone. Because I recognized that face. Not from a family gathering. Not from a photo album. I recognized it from a courtroom. Growing up, I was always the difficult one. Not because I broke rules or caused trouble, but because I asked questions. I noticed things. When my father's construction business kept restructuring every few years, moving money between shell companies, I was the only one who ever asked why. Daniel, 3 years younger, was the golden child. Charming, easy, uncomplicated. He never asked why. He just enjoyed the results, the private school, the new cars, the vacations that never quite matched what our father claimed to earn. I left home at 22 after a fight with my father over money that had gone missing from my grandmother's estate. I became an actual forensic accountant, the very thing that made me complicated. I built a quiet, steady life. I sent birthday cards. I showed up to holidays when invited. I never stopped loving my family, even when they made it clear love wasn't really mutual. When Daniel got engaged to Vanessa Callaway, daughter of real estate magnate Richard Callaway, my mother could not stop talking about it. Old money. A lake house in Michigan. A father who practically ran half the deals in the state. I was happy for Daniel. I really was. I offered to help with the wedding, the seating chart, coordinating with vendors, even offered to pay for the flowers. I was going to be a bridesmaid. I had the dress. I had the shoes. I had a toast written that made my own eyes water when I practiced it in the mirror. Then, 6 days before the wedding, the call came. It's better if you sit this one out. I asked why. My father hesitated. Richard's very particular about appearances. He did a little digging. Saw your job. Saw where you used to work. He doesn't want anyone at the wedding who might make Daniel look bad by association. Might make Daniel look bad. As if being an accountant who once flagged fraud at her own firm was a scandal. As if telling the truth was a stain you could inherit. I said okay. I hung up. And then that photo came through. I stared at Richard Callaway's face in that engagement photo for a full minute before it clicked. 3 years earlier, in my second year at the firm, I had worked quietly as part of a much larger team on a forensic audit tied to a civil fraud case. A real estate developer accused of running a Ponzi-style investment scheme through fake development projects, promising investors returns from buildings that were never actually built. The case settled out of court. The developer's name was sealed in some documents, blurred in others, referred to mostly as RC in the internal file notes I'd helped compile. I hadn't thought about that case in years. But I remembered the face from a single deposition video I'd had to review, frame by frame, cataloging statements for inconsistencies. Richard Callaway. I told myself I was wrong. People have doubles. I was hurt, and hurt people see ghosts everywhere. So I did what I actually do for a living, I checked. It took me 2 hours of public records, old court filings, and one very useful state business registry search to confirm it. Richard Callaway had, under a different corporate name, been the principal in that very case. The lawsuit had been settled quietly, the victims paid a fraction of what they lost, and Callaway had rebranded his company, moved states, and rebuilt his image as a legitimate developer with a habit of funding charity galas and sponsoring youth golf tournaments. He wasn't a criminal in the eyes of the public. He was, on paper, a settled civil matter from a decade ago. But he was also, very much, someone who had taken retirees' life savings and never fully repaid them. And now his daughter was marrying my brother. And my family had uninvited me, the one person who might embarrass them, to protect their reputation with a man who'd built his fortune on other people's ruin. I sat with that information for 2 full days. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I genuinely didn't know what the right thing to do was. I didn't post anything online. I didn't call a tabloid. I didn't even tell Daniel directly at first, because I wanted to be sure, and because some small, stubborn part of me still didn't want to be the one who ruined his wedding. Instead, I called Daniel privately, 3 days before the wedding, and asked him one question. Has Richard ever talked about his old company, before Callaway Premier Holdings? Daniel laughed. Not really. Why? The guy's loaded, Claire. Who cares about ancient history? So I told him. Calmly. With dates, filing numbers, and the settlement amount. I wasn't trying to scare him. I was trying to give him what nobody had ever given me, the full picture, before he made a decision he couldn't undo. Daniel went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why didn't you say anything at the engagement party?" Because Dad uninvited me from the wedding 5 days ago for being complicated. I only put this together after that. There was a long pause. And then Daniel said something I didn't expect. Send me everything you have. He didn't cancel the wedding, that part isn't really mine to tell, because it was his marriage and his choice, not a scandal for me to detonate. But he did sit down with Vanessa, alone, and tell her what he'd learned. Vanessa, it turned out, already knew fragments of her father's past. She'd grown up hearing whispered arguments, watching her mother wince at investors' names in the news. She hadn't known the scale of it. Daniel gave her the choice to know, instead of finding out later from someone with less kindness than her own fiancé. She thanked him. She told him she needed a few days. The wedding still happened. Vanessa decided her relationship with Daniel wasn't her father's to define, and she wasn't going to let his past dictate her future, but she also, quietly, had a long overdue conversation with her father about the people he'd hurt and the amends he'd never made. I wasn't there. I'd already been uninvited, and I didn't push my way back in. Daniel called me the morning of the wedding. "You should be here," he said. Dad made it pretty clear I shouldn't. "Dad doesn't get to decide who my family is," Daniel said. "I do. Get in the car, Claire." I did. I walked in during the reception, in the dress I'd already bought, and nobody stopped me. My father's face, when he saw me, went through about 4 different emotions in 3 seconds. But Daniel had already told him, in no uncertain terms, that I was there because he wanted me there. I gave my toast. It wasn't about Richard Callaway. It wasn't about my father. It was about Daniel, about the little brother who, for the first time in his life, chose to know an uncomfortable truth instead of looking away from it, and chose his sister instead of the easier, quieter path. Richard Callaway didn't go to prison. There was no dramatic arrest at the reception, no headline the next morning. Real life, unfortunately, rarely hands out justice that cleanly. But something did shift. Vanessa quietly began working with a small non-profit that helps fraud victims navigate restitution claims, something she'd never been involved with before. Daniel told me, months later, that it was the one thing Richard never fully understood, that his daughter, of all people, would end up on the other side of the very thing he'd spent years trying to bury. As for my father, we talk less now. Not out of anger, but because something had quietly broken that isn't easily repaired. He never apologized for the phone call. I stopped waiting for him to, but Daniel and I are closer than we've ever been. And every year, on his anniversary, he sends me one message: "Glad you're complicated." I used to think being the difficult one in my family meant something was wrong with me. It took nearly uninviting myself from my own brother's wedding to realize the truth. Sometimes the person who asks too many questions is the only one paying enough attention to catch something everyone else missed. If you've ever been the complicated one in your family, the one who notices too much, asks too much, remembers too much, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. We've got a new one for you every week.
Hello guys, I hope you take some lesson from the story of the day. I hope you enjoyed the channel and video. Thanks for watching. Thanks a lot for like and subscribe. Guys, the writing of the story is very difficult work. Please support me. I am waiting for your support. And my channel recently got demonetized, so I need your support too.